Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Saturday everybody. What I really like about Saturday episodes is that we can cover some of the more interesting and important stories that didn't quite fit into the main developments from the week. So let's jump into them. This week, China's Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs announced that it will further expand the scope of pilot projects for the industrialization of genetically modified GM corn and soybeans. Chinese state media writes that the move, quote, is a significant step to the legalization of GM crops in the world's second largest economy amid efforts to bolster its food security, end quote. One Chinese Academy of Social Sciences researchers speaking to state-run Global Times this week expressed, quote, China will promote GM pilot projects in line with international standards in an orderly manner this year, and if trials go smoothly and successfully, legalization may take place next year. End quote. The academic tried to assure domestic readers, however, that the tests will only involve animal feed rather than human food, quote, due to uncertainties and safety concerns, end quote, though of course humans eat the animals that eat the GM food. Reports from international media suggest that the pilot program is starting small. For example, UK-based Reuters reports, citing unnamed sources, that China will likely plant less than 1% of its cornfields with genetically modified variants this year, quote, dashing hopes for a full market launch of the technology in the world's second largest corn market. End quote. A senior manager at a Chinese seed developer told the outlet that China's Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs has designated around 267,000 hectares, 660,000 acres, to be planted with genetically modified or GMO corn this year. However, we know that food security is now a high political priority in China, and as such we should anticipate this program to expand rapidly in the next 2 years. Next up, yesterday, Friday, the People's Bank of China, China's central bank, published its quarterly monetary report. The report pledged to strike a balance between supporting growth and preventing inflation risks this year. It also expressed that regulators are still assessing the economy's need for further stimulus, vowing to avoid flood-like stimulus, at least on the monetary side. As we have seen, the fiscal side is another story. The effects of monetary policy have been largely limited, as local governments, businesses and households all have low appetite for borrowing. Local governments only do it due to political directives. Analysts with Chinese financial media outlet Yicai observed that the central bank pledged to use structural monetary policy tools to stimulate guidance to credit supply. For example, quote, banks should use technology innovation refinancing and special refinancing for equipment renewal and transformation to meet credit demand in the manufacturing industry, social service sector, and small and medium businesses, end quote. Chinese financial media outlet Caixin, in their own reporting, observed that the People's Bank of China has, quote, used nearly every instrument in its toolbox to spur demand for borrowing, interest rate cuts, subsidized loans, targeted lending facilities such as the medium-term lending facility and relending programs, and liquidity injections into the banking system through cuts in banks' reserve requirement ratios and open market operations, end quote, adding that in 2022 the central bank released more than 1 trillion yuan, $145 billion of long-term funds through 2 cuts in banks' required reserve ratios. As of the end of 2022, the central bank had a balance of about 6.4 trillion yuan of structural monetary policy tools, accounting for 15% of the central bank's total assets. For the real estate sector, the central bank offered 350 billion yuan of special loans for stalled housing projects, and the nationwide average mortgage rate stood at 4.26% in December, the lowest since it began keeping track in 2008. This is all to say that the central bank has really pulled at most of its monetary policy levers. It is no surprise that its leadership is pointing its finger at fiscal options as the best way forward if further stimulus for the economy is required. The People's Bank of China in its report also committed to strengthening relevant regulations to prevent systemic financial crisis. Next up, the space race and Tibet. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the episode, don't forget to hit that like button. It's always a big help. And as always, anyone who can go that extra mile and help me keep the channel financially sustainable, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. A team led by Associate Professor Xu Can with the People's Liberation Army's Space Engineering University in Beijing have published a paper in the Chinese journal Command, Control and Simulation discussing a project codenamed GW, which seeks to establish a huge satellite network in near-Earth orbit to outcompete Elon Musk's Starlink and create a Chinese-built global internet infrastructure for all people in the world. The newly established China Satellite Network Group Co. will lead the project, which will build and launch over 12,900 satellites. SpaceX plans to establish a network of more than 12,000 satellites by 2027, with plans to eventually grow the number to more than 40,000 satellites. According to the report in the Chinese Journal of Command, Control and Simulation, the Chinese company, likely backed with state resources, will attempt to establish its network before Starlink can. Xu's team is very unambiguous in its motivations too. Quote, "We will launch before the completion of Starlink to ensure that our country has a place in low orbit and prevent the Starlink constellation from excessively preempting low orbit resources. We will send satellites in orbits where the Starlink constellation has not yet reached to gain opportunities and even suppress Starlink." End quote. Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post, writing on the paper, observed in a report yesterday that Xu's team is deeply aware of the military applications of such a satellite network, both for China and for its competitors like the US. Quote, "The Starlink satellites can receive data from the US Department of Defense to plan or coordinate their positions, and they are equipped with surveillance sensors to monitor the space environment. China plans to build more powerful radar systems powered by new technology to identify and track Starlink satellites." End quote. Last week, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that the U.S. government had been in talks with Elon Musk about using Starlink internet in Ukraine. Xu's paper on the planned Chinese network also included, quote, "New weapons including lasers and high-power microwaves would be developed and used to destroy Starlink satellites that pass over China or other sensitive regions." End quote. And speaking of sensitive regions, recently the so-called Tibet Development and Reform Commission issued the Tibet region's 14th five-year plan, medium to long-term railway network strategy, which sets out an ambitious and likely incredibly expensive plan to build a massive railway network in the politically sensitive region. All in all, 4,000 kilometers of mostly high-speed railway lines are to be completed by 2025, with the system to expand and construction to continue until 2035. State media writes that, quote, "With Lhasa as the center, the network will cover all prefecture and city-level administrative regions in the area and provide convenient access to Xinjiang, Qinghai, Sichuan, Yunnan, and other neighboring provinces, as well as major land ports along the border." End quote. Make no mistake, this will be incredibly expensive, especially when measured as a per capita rate in the region. But this plan is about political considerations, both domestically and internationally, as much as, if not more than, economic ones. Quote, "It is incredibly ambitious, will be hugely expensive and difficult given the terrain, will be a boon for tourism and economic development, strategically important for the People's Liberation Army, and worrisome for India." End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you all on Monday.